Okay, we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Je m'appelle Aislinn Rowe et c'est un plaisir de vous accueillir pour cette webinaire présenté par DIGNA, le Centre d'expertise canadien pour la prévention de l'exploitation et les abus sexuels. So my name is Aislinn Rowe and I'm pleased to welcome you here to our webinar presented by DIGNA, the Canadian Centre of Expertise on the Prevention of Sexual Exploitation and Abuse. Avant de dire d'autres choses, il est important d'assurer que vous compreniez ce que disent les gens dans cet événement. Donc, c'est une session en anglais, mais avec traduction simultanée. Alors, prenez un moment pour trouver les boutons d'interprétation sur votre écran. Choisissez la langue de votre choix, donc dans ce cas en français, et éliminez l'audio original pour mieux entendre. Vous aurez besoin de la version plus récente de Zoom pour faire cela. So before anything else, if you need interpretation, although this event will be in English primarily, there is simultaneous interpretation. So take a moment to find the button at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation, and you can select English or French. And I suggest muting the original audio if you're choosing French. Donc, j'espère que tout est bien accordé parce que je vais continuer seulement en anglais après cela. Et je prends aussi un moment pour remercier notre interprète qui est dans l'appel avec nous. All right, so I'm going to stop repeating myself in French, but I want to take a moment to thank our interpreter who is with us here today. Some other housekeeping before we jump in. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A function as presentations are going on, and we'll open space for the Q&A at the last 15 to 20 minutes. And at that point, we will allow you to unmute yourself if that's more convenient for you, or we'll answer the questions from the Q&A function. And finally, a note on our code of conduct for virtual events. As we discuss the importance of strong policies in the context of preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, we want to also ensure that our guests today are adhering to the values of respect, inclusion, equity, humility, safety, and solidarity by signing off on this virtual code of conduct that I will launch in the poll function momentarily. So you should see that on your screen there now. Please select yes if you intend to stay and follow those values. While you're doing that, I'll just take a moment to also warn you that while we won't be talking specifically about experiences of sexual exploitation and abuse, that is the context in which we're looking to learn about reducing risks in the recruitment process. So if anyone needs to, you should feel free to excuse yourself at any time. While we won't be sharing, again, personal experiences, we recognize that everyone comes here with their own stories and that this topic can be triggering in general. So please do what you need to do for your own self-care. So now that we have all of the technical stuff out of the way, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the city of Ottawa, located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat peoples. In a completely virtual event, we're all participating from many parts of Canada and around the world. And if you don't already know, I encourage you to learn more about the peoples of origin where you are. The recognition of original peoples in the lands where we find ourselves must compel us to reflect on the privileges we enjoy today as a result of the long history of colonialism. This recognition serves both to remind us of the contributions of those who have gone before us and of the importance of working daily on reconciliation and dialogue. So before I hand over the mic to our moderator today, I'll give a quick introduction about DIGNA. So everyone here today, without exception, has a role to play in preventing and addressing sexual exploitation and abuse in our sector, specifically the misconduct that targets the communities where we work all around the world. So DIGNA supports building the capacity of Canadian organizations to develop and implement PSEA measures. DIGNA is implemented by Cooperation Canada as the national umbrella organization for Canada's international development and humanitarian partners. And both Cooperation Canada members and non-members are offered access to resources and services to respond to their specific PSEA capacity gaps. So today we're focusing on the first line of defense when we're talking about PSEA, which is the prevention during the recruitment process for staff and volunteers. But also as this relates to all other measures that organizations should have in place to prevent it. So I will now hand it over to Erica C. from the Canadian Red Cross.
Thank you, Aislinn, and hello, everyone. As Aislinn said, my name is Erica C., and I work as Senior Legal Counsel for the Canadian Red Cross. Although I will add in that classic lawyer-like caveat that the views I express today are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of my employer. Along with Shauna Gibbons, who you'll hear from today, I'm a member of DIGNA's Legal Working Group, which is a group that supports DIGNA's work by providing legal insights around issues of PSEA and investigations. I'll be serving as moderator for the discussion today on reducing recruitment risks for the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. Our panel today will dive into both the principle and the practicalities of how your organizations can take steps to ensure that perpetrators of sexual misconduct aren't putting your program participants at risk, and also more broadly on how we as a sector can ensure that those people aren't moving within and between different organizations. I'm really excited for our discussion today because I truly believe that the implementation of strong recruitment practices are a key aspect of preventing abuse and exploitation, and also reducing the overall risks to your organizations so that you can continue your humanitarian and development work. As I'm sure you know from your own working contexts, strong policies and practices in recruitment of both paid and unpaid staff are just part of organization-wide strategies for the protection of program participants as we carry out our work. These overarching organizational strategies include really well-established principles of good operational management that I'm sure you're already aware of, like consistent supervision, regular monitoring of staff, as well as specific policies like the avoidance of solitary delivery of services. As I'm sure our discussion today will touch on some of these wider issues, we'll focus though on exploring recruitment-related strategies to prevent sexual abuse and exploitation this morning. So let me now turn to tell you a little bit more about who you'll be hearing from today and a bit more about the structure of our discussion. So our first presenter will be Inez Shonzek, who is the coordinator for the Interagency Misconduct Disclosure Scheme with the Steering Committee for Humanitarian Response. The SCHR leads work on the scheme, which will be the focus of their presentation today. And this disclosure scheme establishes a minimum standard for humanitarian development and other civil society organizations to share information as part of their recruitment processes about people who have been found to have committed misconduct. And by misconduct, we mean, in this context, sexual harassment, sexual abuse, or sexual exploitation during the course of employment. Inez will also be sharing her insights on the experiences of different organizations and sharing some suggestions for best practices. After Inez's presentation, we'll be turning to a presentation by Shauna Gibbons, who is the Departmental Head of Administrative Law at Main Street Law LLP in Alberta. Shauna brings to her presentation both rich experiences as a lawyer and also practical experiences within her work in the humanitarian and development field. Her presentation will touch on the legal implications of prevention and response to sexual abuse and exploitation, and couch these principles within the wider management of human resources, volunteer empowerment, and the importance of transparent and clear communications as role models for PSEA. After the presentations are complete today, we'll have some time for questions, as Aislinn indicated, and then we'll return for a brief closing. So without further ado, I would like to pass the floor over to Inez for our first presentation.
Thanks so much, Erica. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Just let me share my screen with you, and then I will start presenting. I hope you can see my screen. My name is Inez Książek. I'm the coordinator of the Misconduct Disclosure Scheme. And I would like to give you a brief update on what the scheme is aiming to do and how can you become a member. So let me start with who is the SCHR, the Steering Committee for Humanitarian Response. It's an alliance of 9 of the world's leading humanitarian organizations, and you can see them on the screen. And when it comes to how big the SCHR is, there is around 140,000 full-time staff, and every year SCHR members have around 20,000-30,000 staff recruited. And that's why we think that this is a good group to start piloting and testing the scheme, which is applied to recruitment practices. So why the scheme? So the 9 SCHR members decided that the movement of serial abusers is definitely an area where more should be done. Oh, sorry. Let me go back. I hope you can see it. Aislinn, could you nod at me if you can see my screen? Thank you so much. So yeah, so the scheme has been developed as an answer to the serial abusers moving across the sector, because this is definitely something that should be addressed and something that needs more attention. So to give you some brief background about the scheme, the basic idea behind the scheme is sharing of misconduct data between employers. And there are 2 main commitments. When you are becoming an implementing organization, you are committing to systematically check for misconduct data with previous employers when doing a recruitment. And then when you are asked to disclose such sexual misconduct data, which may be on the files of your past employee, you are committing to disclose that. And what the scheme aims to do, it aims to establish a systematic practice which will allow employers to exchange this information and to make better informed recruiting decisions. And our ambition for the future is to cover all staff in position of power, because only when we check all staff, we can be sure that the perpetrators are not moving freely between the posts as they used to in the past. So let me talk briefly about what the scheme does and what it doesn't. So as I've said before, it facilitates sharing of misconduct data to future employers. It also respects data protection and employment law, and I will talk about that a bit more later in the presentation. And it enables hiring organizations to get better information and then make better hiring decisions. And so in turn, it protects both staff and communities we work with. And what the scheme doesn't do. So it doesn't blacklist or whitelist people. There is no central database with the data which could be accessed by the organizations who are implementing. So we are also not aiming to create some sort of a tool which will give you a clear answer to should I hire this person. This is only to share more information, and the decision is with you if you would like to hire or not certain individual. And also it's very important to emphasize that this is not a substitute for a comprehensive approach of prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. This is just something that should be used on top of existing policies and procedures. And what we are aiming to do by introducing the scheme, is by providing this tool. So the scheme is a tool which we are providing. We are hoping that with the help of the agencies who are implementing the scheme, there will be more confidence that this can be implemented in line with the legal requirements. And then when we have more and more agencies signing up and we can prove that the scheme is both in line with the legal requirements and it's practical and quite easy to implement, that we will attract more and more agencies. And so we will create this cycle. And so in the end, cover all staff who are in the position of power. So let me talk a bit more about the scheme itself and how it looks like. To start with, we've recently introduced a new governance process because we've identified that there is a need for a more structured decision-making process to ensure that the scheme can be adapted and can be suitable for all needs, and that we can easily take on board the feedback and comments from the organizations who are currently implementing. As in the initial year, that was 2019, we had 14 organizations, and then last year in 2020, that was 65 organizations. So you can see that the growth has been quite significant, and that's why we've decided to introduce this new governance system so that the scheme can be adopted by all types of organizations and that we are considering all perspectives. We are also working closely with other initiatives such as Project Soteria, the Aid Worker Registration Scheme, and UN's ClearCheck, as all of those projects are somehow linked to the safer recruitment practices and can collaborate closely to ensure that we are all working together and not duplicating the work we are doing, but also looking at how we can work together to improve the existing systems. And let me move on and talk a bit more about how the scheme looks in practice. So signing up to the scheme, as I said before, means that we are making 2 commitments. And you need to make sure that before you sign up, that you can meet those 2 commitments. So the 2 commitments are to check the references and ask for sexual misconduct data every time when you are running a recruitment, and to provide such information every time when you are asked for it by another organization. And we also ask organizations who are signed up to the scheme to provide implementation data on an annual basis. And I will share this data with you later so that you can see why is it so important for us at SCHR to have it. There are no subscription or other costs to signing up. This is covered by SCHR. And we are also asking organizations to provide some additional information. Oh, sorry. There are some legal requirements which I should probably mention briefly. So the scheme has been designed to be applied worldwide, and we had a working group of lawyers supporting the development of the scheme. And we acknowledge that there might be some issues caused either by the data protection law or by national labor law, and this might affect the implementation. As I said on this slide, we took into account the GDPR, the European data protection, but not the data protection laws that are applicable all over the world. But so far, we found that the data protection law should not affect the implementability of the scheme, although the national labor law in some countries might be a problem, which we are trying to address. And what is the scheme itself? What you can see on this slide, it's called Statement of Conduct. And this is the reference form which we are using. So this is the request which you are committing to make every time when you are doing a recruitment. As you can see, it looks more or less as your regular reference request, so it can be easily adapted as part of what you are using right now. And so far, it seems like this is quite easy to adapt and merge with existing reference checks. We also, as I mentioned before, ask for implementation data, and I won't go into details right now, but it's very important for us. and I'm delighted to share that this is the first meeting when I will be sharing the data from the 2020 externally, because yesterday we've had the annual meeting of the implementing organizations. And this is what I was able to share with them yesterday, and this is what I'm able to share here today. So as you can see, this is the comparison of data from 2019 and then 2020, and you can see that there is a significant growth in the number of requests for misconduct data which have been made. As I said, in 2019, we had 14 implementing organizations who had been piloting the scheme for us and checking how it works in practice. In 2020, we've moved to 63 organizations, and the scope of the scheme was much broader. And I'm really delighted to share this data, and I'm glad that I received it in time, because this shows that the scheme is growing and that we are slowly building this systematic practice of checking the references. Of course, I have to acknowledge that last year with COVID-19 was not the best year for recruitment. So I'm still glad that there is some data which shows that the scheme is growing. Also, just let me talk briefly about the rejected applicants, the numbers which you can see at the end. So those applicants are the applicants which have been rejected at the final stage of recruitment, either because they had sexual misconduct data on their files, or because there has been gaps on their CVs which they couldn't explain when asked. And then just coming back to SCHR and what we can do for implementing organizations. When the scheme has been established, we've acknowledged that there might be some legal challenges in front of the implementing organization. And that's why we've collated legal advice, and this is available on our website, but this is work in progress and we are updating it all the time. We also have something called How to Implement Guide, because the scheme has been developed by lawyers, and I recognize that the language is not the easiest, and not everyone, for example, in HR or referencing team has enough legal background, I don't have it, for example, to understand the scheme itself. We also have some sample communication materials, as we found out based on the experiences from implementing organizations, that really communication helped a lot, and good practices in communicating to all your staff about the scheme, training HR and references team is really key when it comes to the scheme. And we also provide some support with promoting and onboarding organizations, because the tendency is, especially for bigger organizations, when they sign up, they start implementing in one place. Usually that's the HQ, because that's the easiest. And then after some time, after checking how much resource I need for that, they roll the scheme across the whole organization. So I'm providing support with that as well. We also have something that's called Schemes Registry. And the Schemes Registry has been established, first of all, to provide approved contact points. So when you are about to request a reference, you know whom you should contact. And this is key, because this makes the whole process a lot easier. We are making sure that the reference requests are not being lost, and that this request lands with someone who has all information that are needed to return this with all details. We also include details on which parts of organizations are implementing, because, for example, if I say Oxfam is implementing, that sounds very well, but Oxfam has more than 20 affiliates, so to avoid misrepresentation, and again, to make it easier for organizations requesting references, we are providing contact details for each part of organization. And this is available on our website, and everyone can check it. We also in the future aim to allow everyone to update their own data, but this is still in progress, so I won't talk about that. And I think that's it from my side when it comes to the scheme. You can look for more information on our website, or you can contact me or my colleague Gareth, and we'll be more than happy to support. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ines. Okay, We will again have time for questions at the end of the presentations. So for the time being, we're going to now switch over to the next presentation by Shauna Gibbons. Take it away, Shauna.
Pardon me. Thank you so much, Erica. If you can't hear me, just pop something in the chat and I'll move my microphone. Good morning. My name is Shauna Gibbons and I'm a lawyer in and for the province of Alberta. And I live and work with the benefits of Treaty 6 territories in Misconduct, which is the Cree name for Edmonton. And I'm grateful to the First Nations, Métis and Inuit people who have shared their resources with me this morning. I am a member of Digna's Lawyers Working Group, and I have the great privilege of working with some incredible and dedicated women who believe in the justice that laws appropriately applied can bring. Thank you for this opportunity to meet with you and discuss the important work we share to prevent sexual abuse and exploitation, which I will refer to as PSEA. A bit about me. Law is my second career. Prior to law school, I spent 20 years with the United Church of Canada as youth and young adult ministry, a DLM, first in a congregation, and then ended my career with 7 years at the provincial and national level. Part of my role in those positions was to provide safe space for vulnerable populations, including policy creation, codes of conduct development, screening measures, intervention response, and training measures. I speak today as much out of this experience as I do my training as a lawyer. I hope that this brief presentation and my responses to your questions later will assist you and your organizations to identify and mitigate risk for the vulnerable people with whom you work and serve. It is my intention to provide you with high-level legal information to assist you in risk management strategies that I sincerely hope will prevent someone from experiencing sexual abuse or exploitation. I will not be providing legal advice. Not only is that against the Legal Professions Act of Alberta for me to provide legal advice out of province or country, but it's also unwise. I cannot give you specific information about your individual situations, but rather a high-level information. The Lawyers Working Group is developing resources for Digna that provide details for organizations about the Canadian legal context that may assist you in trusting your good common sense and in knowing when you do need to reach out in your local networks for specific legal advice. It is with the good work of these colleagues that I speak to you today. So, risk management. What do we mean? When a lawyer starts talking about risk, my mind goes directly to lawsuits, scandals, and criminal trials. I don't know about you, but that's where my mind goes. In my experience, that is often where organizations begin. We don't want to get sued, so what do we have to do to avoid that? Risk management is more than avoiding legally protecting your organization and avoiding a lawsuit. Risk management is honestly identifying where is the potential for harm in your organization, who is most at risk as a victim and a perpetrator of this harm, and setting a strategy to mitigate or prevent this harm. Wanting to avoid a lawsuit is an important start in the direction of PSEA. Organizations utilize tools like the scheme that we just heard about. However, it is important that organizations implement a comprehensive strategy. And from our perspective in the Lawyers Working Group and from my experience, that includes 1, due process. 2, effective policy and procedures. And 3, implementation of those policies and procedures. Pardon me. So first of all, let's begin with due process. What do we mean? Strategies at the point of hire are a powerful PSEA tool. In this context, I'm referring to hire, meaning both staff and volunteers. The disclosure tool and scheme that we heard about is one potential strategy, but it cannot be effective on its own. References or the lack of them, questions asked in screening mechanisms, effective interviewing, and social media searches are key measures to mitigate risk, which I'm sure you all are aware of. The point of hire is a powerful tool in the hands of organizations. 2, effective policy and procedures. Once the actual hire occurs, the mitigation does not end. Clear policy that is effectively communicated and also re-communicated about the expectations of the organization in behavioral conduct and reporting is a crucial measure in PSEA. Effective training and retraining, reporting and response procedures, monitoring the work of staff and volunteers with specific information gathering from the vulnerable population, regular vulnerability audits, complaint lines, and personal support for the stressors facing staff and volunteers are all essential mechanisms in PSEA. 3rd, implementation. Unfortunately, there is no simple answer or perfect little pill that will inoculate an organization from risk. It is an ongoing commitment to PSEA implementation of your policies and procedures prior to, at the point of, and after hire that will provide the most comprehensive risk management strategy for your organization. Implementation also means being willing to leave a position vacant if an appropriate candidate or volunteer cannot be found. It means taking extra time, which I know is difficult to find, and funds, which may be even harder, to act on your policy and procedures. A good risk management strategy meets resistance in its implementation. But without implementation, the process, policy, and procedures are hollow. So let's return to our entry point of avoiding a lawsuit. Generally speaking, a Canadian court in a lawsuit is going to look at multiple factors in an organization's behavior when looking to remedy or put a particular dollar amount to harm that was caused to someone who ought to have been protected by the organization. So generally across Canada, courts are looking at many factors and there's no one checkbox that a court says, okay, you've checked that off and now you're fine. Instead, Canadian courts look to multiple factors. There is no single tool that will guarantee a win in court, if anyone ever really wins in court, but that's a whole nother topic. But is a win really our goal? To protect your organization from scrutiny is certainly your duty to your organizations. But in the lawyers group of Digna, we think that the ultimate goal is the eradication of sexual assault and exploitation from humanitarian aid and organizations. The law steps in once the harm has occurred. However, a solid risk management strategy assists your organizations to avoid harm altogether. I'm going to step off script a bit and respond to the Canadian context in terms of employment and privacy. And let you know that in Canada, those are predominantly provincial matters. So the laws that I utilize in Alberta are different from the laws in Ontario or Nova Scotia or BC or Saskatchewan. And they're predominantly employment statutes, employment law statutes, and privacy statutes. And so that's another reason why I can only give you a high level response to your questions today. I'll do my best to network you should you need specific legal advice. But in Canada, that's generally at the provincial level. So the law steps in to tell you what you can and cannot share with each other in your specific province, wherever you are incorporated or wherever you are working from. And that can be quite complicated if you are operating in multiple provinces within Canada, and also from a province in Canada and also overseas. So there's a number of different complicating factors that may apply to you. The law steps in at the beginning to talk to you about what you can and cannot share with each other, and what you can and cannot ask in an interview. But a solid risk management strategy can help you navigate those difficult and complex waters. The law also steps in once harm has occurred, and that's ultimately where organizations tend to begin their risk management strategy. So again, generally speaking, courts are not looking at one specific magic checkbox that if you check that off, you are avoiding a lawsuit or legal ramifications, but rather a whole host of how have you behaved, how have you conducted yourselves with due diligence, and in mitigating risk for your people. The alternatives, it seems to me, to not implementing a risk management strategy, despite how difficult it can be. The alternatives are counterintuitive, in my opinion, to the reasons why most of us enter human rights and humanitarian work in the first place. And that is to serve and to care for others. Thank you again for inviting me to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Shauna. Okay, two really fascinating presentations, and I'm sure there are questions, and I do encourage you now you have two options. One is to put them in the chat and I will read them out for our panelists, one or both of them, or you could simply take yourself off mute and ask the question. Let me first check the chat to see if anybody has already put up any questions, and I see there haven't. So let me go ahead and invite our audience members to go ahead and ask again, direct your questions to one or both panelists, please. And you will need to take yourself off mute. Okay. Maybe while our audience members work on some questions, maybe I'll ask just a question, initial question of our panelists. So both of you spoke of different strategies for safer recruitment practices for humanitarian and development organizations. I'm wondering if you could maybe share with our audience one single specific practical strategy that you would offer, especially a small or medium-sized organization that wants to implement some of these practices. Again, quite a specific and practical one for an organization that might be a little bit short on human resources. Inez, would you like to start?
Sorry, I lost the unmute with button. Thank you so much, Erica. So yes, when it comes to the smaller or medium-sized organizations, I would say you are very lucky. This is much easier for you when it comes to implementing the scheme, at least. Because based on what I've heard so far from our implementing organizations, having a smaller number of employees means that you can talk with them and make sure that they understand what the organization is signing to. You can make sure that you have enough time with your HR and you can oversee the training of all your HR or referencing teams. And then in addition to that, I'm here and it's also, I'm happy to help. And it's also easier for me if there is one team because it's so easy to talk with everyone at once and just make sure that all questions are answered.
Excellent, thank you. And Shauna, would you like to add anything in?
Yeah, that's a great response, Inez. And I think you're wise in saying there's some benefits in a smaller organization or a medium-sized organization. And the benefits from my experience are in relationships. You know the people that you're hiring and you work with them in a much closer way than in a larger organization. That being said, it can be really difficult to hire a lawyer for specific information. It's costly to hire a lawyer. It's difficult to find one that works with small organizations in a way that fits with your organization's style. So that's where the resources of Digna are developing. And certainly we're aware of that in the lawyers working group in the resources that we're developing. And hope to have online to you in the coming weeks and months to assist you in smaller and medium-sized organizations in asking questions much more efficiently. So you're utilizing your legal fees effectively. And hopefully we can provide you with some networking down the road with how you can connect with lawyers that we've worked with or we know of and we trust.
Fantastic. Thank you very much to both of you. I see we have a few questions that are starting to come in on the chat. So I will read them off, the first two that have come in. These are from Chelsea Summer, who asks, do you have recommendations for addressing recruiting in remote or insecure areas where vetting is more difficult? Excellent question. Shauna, why don't we start with you this time?
Sure, that is an excellent question. Yeah, I'm really honestly not sure how to answer that because remote or insecure areas, one of the go-tos is internet, but a remote or insecure area doesn't have secure internet. So that's difficult. There may be specific written tools that you can use, but at that point, a remote or insecure area is definitely a much higher risk situation for both staff and either volunteer or employment and the people that you're serving. So that is even more important in the higher phase that you have implemented really solid screening process. So check those references, listen to the references, have a really clear policy in place and use it in your interview. Use it as one of your screening questions. For example, if you are, if one of your policies is no tolerance for homophobic comments, then name that in your screening process and make it part of what you require a candidate to talk about in advance and also at the interview. Get specific examples from them in real time before you hire, so that you know as much as you can in advance how this person is going to respond in those remote places when under stress. But beyond that, it's a really difficult position, and maybe Inez has some greater wisdom than I do on this one, but it's a great question.
Inez, over to you.
Thanks so much, Erika. And thanks so much, Shauna. This is a really good answer. And Chelsea, this is a great question in the first place, because, well, that's the nature of the work we are doing. We are going to those remote and hard to reach areas, and everything that gets harder when we get there, including reference checks. So we unfortunately found that we are struggling with going out of some locations, and we are struggling with implementation. So what we've proposed, actually yesterday, we've proposed that we will start focusing on areas where the implementation is not great. And I will be the one leading this work, and in close collaboration with the existing implementing organizations and EASC, PSEA focal points in countries. We will look at which locations are maybe interested in engaging, because I understand that this needs resources and time. So if there are some locations when there is an interest, and we've heard from Ethiopia, Syria, we've heard from some countries in Pacific, we've heard from so many countries, and we are hoping to go there and work with them closely on how to support the implementation of the scheme. We need to look at the recruiting practices and referencing practices in general, and see how we can develop something that could help. And then we aim to have some tools and materials available, which would perhaps be useful in such remote and hard to reach areas. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. And I guess I would also just add to the responses that, you know, when you have insufficient information, or, you know, some lack of information on the recruitment side, those other policies and practices, the post-hire practices that Shauna was speaking to, do then raise in importance. Because then that would be your opportunity to, you know, use all the tools in our toolkit that we have as employers to ensure everything is carrying out as it should be. Let me now go to another question from our chat. This one looks like it is primarily directed to you, Inez, with regard to the scheme. It asks, this is from Catherine Gray. She asks, we submit our data and the scheme gives us a reference questionnaire, ? Can we ask them to check whether or not an individual has been flagged by other employers? Over to you, Inez.
Thanks, Eureka. So no, that's not how the scheme works. So the idea is that what exchanges is the data related to sexual misconduct, and as CHR, so me, I don't see anything. This exchange is happening between the past employers and you as the prospective employer. And this has been established this way to avoid legal risks. Unfortunately, it is not possible to create a central database so that I can give you this information about all those blacklisted individuals, which would be great and very easy. But unfortunately, due to the legal requirements, that's not possible. And that's why we are encouraging past employer and prospective employer to work on this exchange. Thank you.
Maybe I can offer a bit of practical support. You can't, it's true, you can't, certainly in any jurisdiction that I know of in Canada, ask point blank, have you ever been charged? Have you ever been investigated? There's privacy laws and a number of other laws that step in to prevent you from doing that. However, nothing really prevents you from presenting anecdotal situations in an interview. So for example, saying something like, you're in a situation where you're one-on-one in a remote location, you don't have access to internet, you don't have an ability to contact anyone else. You're on your own. And the person who is receiving aid from you makes a sexual innuendo or offer to you. How do you respond? Questions that use the stories that you have heard about either from your organization's past or from other jurisdictions or other organizations, or that you can imagine being a potential risk, can be presented in an anecdotal manner in an interview. You can't ask if they've had specific experience, but you can, as seasoned HR people and as working with your organizations as long as you have, you can gauge whether or not the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, if the answer seems reasonable, if it seems that it's coming too quickly or it's too rehearsed. Those kinds of questions can certainly be asked, and that information can be useful to you. Just a practical intervention. So.
No, that's a great intervention, Shauna. Thank you very much. I'm going to just pause for 1 minute to give opportunity for anybody who wanted to take themselves off mute to ask their question directly to do so. So if anybody would like to take the floor, I will pause here for a moment. Okay, I will go back. Oh, yes, please carry on.
Hi, Steve Tipman with Trade Facilitation Office Canada. Thanks, this is great stuff. I really like the incorporation of the reference questions and also some ideas in terms of situational interview style questions to be asking. Any advice on the job poster itself? You know, oftentimes we see, and we certainly talk about, you know, how we celebrate diversity, you know, those types of things within a job poster. But is there any specific language things that we should be putting in the job poster? That way, you know, when we get to the interview questions and we're asking these types, which is, you know, can be quite sensitive in nature, it's not a shock, it's not a surprise to anybody. It's kind of a continuation around what we tolerate and what we don't tolerate when it comes to PSEA. Thank you.
Very interesting. Good question. Ines, why don't we go to you first?
Thank you, Erica. And that is a really good question. And actually what I would say is that it's really good to, you know, be clear about that and just say what you just said, that this is our expectation, our organization. If you are planning on working with us, we are expecting you to make a commitment that you won't be committing sexual misconduct, that those are the values you will be holding. And we will ask you to sign some documents, because I see Shauna nodding, but I think it also can be later used in case if there are any issues. So yeah, I would just recommend to be really clear in your job advert and explain everything. And also when there is an organization who is implementing the scheme, we also encourage them to let all applicants know what the scheme is about and what will be checked when they are applying for a position. But that's a really good question. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I'm nodding because it's absolutely what I was going to say too. The greater transparency you have, the sooner you can provide it, the better your risk management will be, in my opinion. So in your job posting and in your poster, however you do that, or your advertising mechanism, put directly on there, we are a signatory of, and whatever PSEA signatories apply to your organization. All people here, I believe, are DIGNA signatories or members. So that might be in Canada, one way to say we're a DIGNA signatory, which means that we are going to be screening for the prevention of sexual abuse and exploitation. And the questions that we will be asking will touch on some screening mechanisms and provide those mechanisms in your website or your information, or something that a candidate can access that says, oh, they're actually going to find out about my history, I'm not going to apply. So that's, or great, this organization is actually screening to protect me as much as the people that I serve. So the greater transparency that you have, the better. And you can do that in the original media campaign for recruitment, in the job posting, and as you begin to go down the higher process, any additional questionnaires or other mechanisms that you employ, be direct. We're a signatory, and that means that we're asking these questions, and you will want to have those questions vetted. That's my legal caveat. You'll want to have them vetted to make sure that they're within employment and privacy laws. But transparency is a good rule of thumb.
Excellent. And I see that Aislinn has posted the link in the chat to the Leaders Pledge that Shauna was referring to, both in English and in French. All right, I see that there's a number of very interesting questions in the question function. So I will revert back over to reading out question, but I'll again give the floor in a few moments for anybody that wants to ask a question of our panelists by taking yourself off mute. Et les questions en français sont bienvenues aussi. All right, over to our question panel. What education and knowledge do you as an organization and as a lawyer have in regard to people with personality disorders? These people are very clever in misrepresenting themselves. That is an anonymous question from our audience. Shauna, I'll go back and forth, and so over to you.
Thanks, Erica. Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. And I'm not a psychologist at all. My legal training has taken me into family law at times in Alberta. And there's a rule of thumb in family law that if you are in court more than once, then one or both parties have some form of mental illness. That generally parties who are reasonable are out of court. They're resolving the matters in the best interest of their children and in their own best interest, and they're saving their money, and they're running for they're just running. So unfortunately, the law doesn't help us with mental illness in these kinds of situations where there is a power imbalance. The law assumes that everyone is reasonable. Your screening process assumes that the people that you are interviewing are reasonable. The mechanisms that we develop as a lawyers working group have the assumption that people are reasonable, and you're identifying the crack in the system. And it's a very real and dangerous crack. I'm acknowledging that, and I'm going to take that back to the lawyers working group actually, and pose that to our group to offer some kind of better response than me saying, sorry, I don't know. I just recognize the difficulty in it. I'm sorry, I'm not more help.
No, it's a very difficult issue. And perhaps I'll just add in you know, it as much as it is a very difficult issue, I would mention that you know, you do as an organization always have those other tools in your toolkit to consistently and regularly monitor your employees, to, for example, avoid solitary contact between participants in a program and staff. You know, definitely having, you know, regular supervisory meetings, check-ins, performance reviews, all those things that good organizations do anyway can help mitigate against that risk. Although, you know, as both of our panelists have said, there's no one perfect little pill that will solve all problems and mitigate all risks. We all do the best we can.
Yeah, I just want to jump off of what you've said. It's, I think you're right. Absolutely. There's other mechanisms ongoing, and sometimes you can't figure that out in an interview. But when you trust your gut, when something's not quite right, follow it through. And what I have learned about personality disorders is that the number one antidote is truth. And so make sure that in your practices are documentation practices. So you document, write down, I talked to this person on this day at this time. I talked to this person about X, Y, and Z. I heard from this person on this day at this time. Or send yourself an email. I just had a phone call with blah, blah, blah. So you've got a date stamp in the email. And then approach the person, or in your mechanism, have some kind of way of checking back in and saying, these are the things that raise some red flags for me. Let's talk about it. Or you go to management and say, these are some of the things that are raising some red flags. Let's talk about it. So the antidote is truth, but that takes time to build.
Absolutely, well said, Shauna. Inez, I see from Aislinn that we are almost out of time, but I just want to quickly give you the chance to weigh in and respond if anything sprung to mind.
Yeah, I think it's just to acknowledge that this is a very sensitive issue and this is a very question. And I think in the end, it's important to remember that we are only human and there is as much as we can do. And as Shauna said, there is no magic pill which will help us solve all issues. It just remember to make sure you monitor what's happening, you listen to staff, you listen to your colleagues, because that can help you a lot in addressing some issues which are not clear at the moment when you recruit someone. Thank you.
Absolutely, very good reminder, Inez. All right, so unfortunately we didn't get a chance to get to absolutely all of our questions in the chat today, but we'll try to include some responses in our follow-up notes after the presentation, which as you know is being recorded, so you will have the opportunity to review it later. I also want to take a moment to encourage you to take the survey that we will have, a feedback survey on SurveyMonkey to regarding this panel discussion. I believe Aislinn put it in the chat and it will also be available to you subsequently. And with that, I would like to sincerely thank you all for taking the time today to attend and participate with all those excellent questions in our webinar today. We sincerely hope that you found it to be both interesting and practically useful to you in your respective organizational roles. And could you please take a moment to give us all, our panelists, a virtual round of applause for their excellent presentation and interventions today. And with that, I would like to thank you all for coming and wish you a very good day.